Hi, this is James from My Take on Reality. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Chantel and Pedro and the dissolution of their relationship and marriage and what I think is the actual cause. Let's get it. Now, first and foremost, you have to understand how you start is how you finish. Now, this is very important because if you listen to Pedro and his description of their marriage and where it started to fall apart, it all started to fall apart at the very beginning because he always put her up on a pedestal, according to him. He always catered to her needs. He always followed what she wanted, and she kind of became the leader and the focal point of the relationship. Now, when this happens, 9 times out of 10, when you give somebody a certain level of power or a certain privilege, for you to question whether that person should have that power or question the privilege that you're providing them, it almost becomes a sense that you're taking away a right that they have. For instance, if every day you walk in and there's a person there who you give $5 to, every time you see them, you give them $5. Whether it's a grandson, child, whoever. Every time you see them, you give them $5. There becomes an expectation, and when they hear your name, that you're going to walk in and hand them $5. So let's say you do this for 6 months to a year, or in Chantel and Pedro's case, you do this for several years. Every day you see them, you give them $5. $5. Then one day, you say, hey, I didn't have a chance to stop. I don't have change. I can't give you your $5. Now, instead of you not giving them $5 of your dollars, now you're essentially taking $5 from them. And that's how they see it. When Pedro consistently puts Chantel first and he consistently puts her up on a pedestal, what happens is she expects to be placed on a pedestal. She expects that their relationship will always work, that she comes first. And when she doesn't, there's going to be problems. Now all of a sudden, Pedro's acting different. Pedro's not treating me the same. Pedro's not being loving. Pedro's not being caring. And you're always going to have these difficulties. So my suggestion is that whatever bad behavior or whatever questionable motives somebody may have or questionable actions that somebody has, you have to nip that in the bud. If you're with somebody and, for instance, they always kind of, you're with a guy and he always turns around and looks at every female that walks by. If you don't nip that in the bud, in 2 months or a year, 10 years, you try to say something to him. Hey, I don't like when you do that. I feel like you're disrespecting me. What are you talking about? I've always been doing this. Now all of a sudden you're trying to act funny. You're trying to act new. You're trying to act different, and you get into all kinds of problems. One of the other things that I noticed about the breakdown in this relationship was the idea of communication. Now, a lot of times, every channel, my channel, any channel that you listen to on YouTube, will talk about communication and the importance of it and how critical it is that you talk to each other and all that. But the truth of the matter is, communication only really works if you talk to listen. Like, you actually have to try to listen to each other. You want to find out information that you don't necessarily have from that other person. Now, this requires that you listen 2 times more than you speak. That's why you have 2 ears, 1 mouth. That's an old saying. But what happens in this particular situation is Chantel would always kind of use communication and say that they have an open relationship and they talk about everything. But really what it is she would use the information that she has to further a point or further a script that she has already written out for herself. So it's not necessarily communication so that she can support her husband, but it was communication so that she can support whatever position or point she has, which kind of goes to the whole idea that just because you're having a discussion or you're a conversation, every conversation isn't a debate. When people talk and they have an agenda as to what it is that they want to try to get out of the conversation or the point that they want to relay, they're only listening for the openings where they can come in and support their point. And sometimes you'll get into these discussions, and I say it a lot of times in the episodes, if you go back and watch the Family Chantel episodes, where especially where Pedro was talking about his mother and talking about his sister. Chantel will always have some kind of agenda whenever he's telling a story or he's talking about the troubles that he's having with his mom or his sister or a discussion they're having. She'll always say something like, oh, you need to stop talking to your mom because this is why she's a bad person. Remember when you told me? And that's kind of what you see in these communication sessions between Chantel and Pedro, which is why I think the relationship is actually failing. You know, somebody with an information versus a script. When I'm getting information because I want to support my partner. I want to understand what's going on with them so I can help them get through it, or I can listen to them, because sometimes, fellas especially, sometimes women just want to say things out loud. They don't necessarily want you to fix their problems. They just want to be able to vent to you and say what the problem is out loud because they already know what they have to do. They already know how they have to deal with it. They just want to say the problem out loud. Guys automatically go into the I'm gonna fix all your problem mode, and that usually comes into I'm just gonna listen enough so that I can tell you what I think, and that creates a breakdown in communication and a breakdown in your relationship. What you should be listening for is the opportunity to support your partner. And that's where Chantel was failing, because she wasn't listening for the opportunities to support her partner when he was going through things. Specifically, I'm talking about when he went to DR. If you notice, both parties, both Chantel and Pedro, described the breakdown of their relationship after he got back from the DR. What happened in the DR? Pedro went to the Dominican Republic to try to reconnect with his father. Now, if you follow the episodes at all, you would know that Pedro grew up in a home where his mother was having an affair. She was the mistress or the side chick to his father's marriage. He has a whole family. Then he kind of comes out, hangs out with Pedro's mother for a time where he has Pedro and his sister. Then he bounces and goes back to his life with his wife and his kids. And Pedro hasn't had any contact with him since that time when he was a child. And this deeply hurts Pedro. And Pedro, going through this, had a big argument with his mother when he realized that his mother was involved with this. And not only is she a victim, but she was a willing participant. And his grandmother was a willing participant. And his sister is now kind of following in those footsteps because she's messing with a guy who's married in Alejandro. And so Pedro was going through a lot because he was conflicted by his upbringing and the pain from his upbringing, and confronting the idea that his mother and his sister and the women that he held closest to him, his grandmother, were all a part of that pain. And not only did they participate in creating this environment, but they openly accept that this is something that is positive for his sister to do. And instead of Chantel listening to what he was saying so that she can give him support, so she could try to get him through this tough time, what she tried to do was she listened enough that she could go back and undercut the mother and undercut the sister so he would cut them off. In my point of view, this backfires because it created a scenario where now Pedro is turning his back on his mother, and he's turning his back on his sister and possibly his grandmother, and he hasn't contacted them, and he's not as close to them as he once was. And if he can turn his back on them, then he can definitely turn his back on you when he has complications with you. So you would encourage him to be disloyal, which is what she did. She was encouraging him to be disloyal by turning his back on his family. The other part of communication is when you communicate with each other, you listen to one another, and you, like I said, you spend more time listening than you do trying to figure out what you're going to say. Then what happens is, as that person grows and develops and begins to change, because you're listening to them and you're participating in their life by understanding what they're going through, it allows you the opportunity to go along with them as they start to develop and grow and become different people. I'm a different person now than I was in my 20s. And that's what happens. If you expect somebody to stay the same, what occurs is that person, as they develop and they change, you will grow apart. And by you growing apart, you're not developing and changing with them because you're trying to lock them into the box that you're used to, which goes back to the first thing that I said, as far as how you start is how you finish. A lot of people will try to lock you into a box, and they don't want you to grow and change and develop. They like you just the way you are. And in this case, Chantel liked a situation where she was in control of the money. She was in control of the future, and everything was vested in her because she was the one who was going to work and get this big time job, and Pedro was working at the warehouse because she enjoyed the fact that Pedro was beneath her. And this is where you kind of get in that point where if somebody doesn't allow you to grow, you have to look at that. And at that point, you have to make a choice. Either you're going to continue to shrink down and minimize yourself so that you can be with this person, or you have to separate from that person because you have outgrown that person. Some people in your life are leaves. They come and go with the season. Some people in your life are like branches. You know, they seem sturdy up until the point you try to step out on them and put that weight on them, and they'll break underneath your feet. But other people are like roots, and these are the people who allow you to grow and develop and become what it is you are meant to be. Love isn't just you wanting the best for me. Love is you wanting for me what I want most for myself and allowing me to experience those things. And if you don't allow me to experience those things, you're trying to cage me and hold me down. And that's what's happening with Pedro. Pedro is trying to grow beyond just the island boy that Chantel used to mess around with and have a good time with. He's trying to become an adult, and he doesn't see himself with her because she won't allow him to become the man that he wants to be. There's another part of this entire situation which really bothers me, and that's the maturity level. I think that also created a huge problem between Pedro and Chantel. Pedro is trying to be more the adult in this scenario, where he's trying to develop and grow and become more professional, whereas Chantel is kind of falling back on the shenanigans of her mom and her dad, where everything is about, oh, I'm going to tell them and I'm going to read them and I'm going to boss them out. And, and you have to ask yourself a question. In Chantel's particular case, she had to ask herself a question. And the question was simply this: do you want to be a wife, or do you want to be a boss bitch? Those are your questions. See, if you want to be a wife, then you have to support your man. You have to try to understand what his needs are. And at the same time you're trying to meet his needs, you want to ensure that he's doing what's necessary to have your needs met as well. And in that mutual beneficial relationship, you both can grow and you both can flourish. If you want to be the boss bitch, then you want to be the chick that goes down and cusses out Pedro, and Pedro fall in line and do what you tell him to do. He's not a partner at that point. He's an employee. In addition, you want to be able to show up to his job or a workplace event and cuss out everybody he works with so that everybody in the place understand who you are, what you was about, and all that other stuff. That doesn't mean anything. The truth of the matter is, if you're a tough person, if you're a scary person, you never have to tell somebody that you're scary. You never have to tell somebody you tough. If you really think about it, anybody who you ever grew up with was really about that life, you already knew about them before they even open their mouth. They don't have to brag and they don't have to run a resume for you to understand that this person is dangerous. Bottom line, if Pedro and Chantel wanted this relationship to work, they would have had to listen to one another. They would have to love and support one another. And more importantly, they would have to make the conscious effort to grow with one another. If you don't grow with your loved one, you are going to either grow with them or you're going to grow apart. That's my take. I'm James. I'm out.